You good to go?
Good to go, man.
Sweet. Welcome back to the Open Up Podcast, everyone. It's episode 81 with Luka Reedy. I'd like to say founder of the Cold Water Club.
Yeah, founder of the Cold Water Club, man. For sure.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds good. Didn't even think that was coming through there. Nice. I'm still waiting for you to come down.
A lot of people are. It's something about getting up early and going to the beach.
Yeah,
I'd rather just
winter,
stay in my comfort zone and do my cold shower for 1 minute.
Oh, good on you. That's still good, man. That's still very good.
Deep-ish question straight off the bat, brother. Could you describe the way that you view yourself as a man and or human?
Good question, man. I'm a man now I'm a man now striving to be the best possible version of myself. Purely, and that's from the heart too, because I think a lot of people put this impression of like they've got to achieve something outside of themselves, but really the big focus is within, and I'm a big believer in that. And it took me a little while to realize that, and now it's just like everything I do must come back to me, clearing something in me to become a better person.
That's probably one of the most simple answers, but one of my favorite so far.
Yeah. Oh, awesome, man.
Because that's all you can do, man. That's all you can do is be the best version of yourself.
Yeah, totally, man. And it strips away all that ego stuff, and it strips away the sense of the desire to like be someone other than yourself. We're always wanting to be something big on social media. We want to be big on this, or like have this certain amount of followers, or have this accolade. But at the end of the day, that is good, but that will actually come when you come back to yourself and work on yourself.
Yep.
Because we can get all those accolades, but we can still be miserable as fuck. You know what I mean?
100%.
Yeah. And I've seen it. And that's what, I think if something didn't switch within me, I would have actually got to that point where I would have been miserable, but had the accolades. Yeah. Like we touched on it before. I was very ambitious, very driven, but then what was I doing that for? And did it have substance?
Yeah, and it's all about perspective too, because to someone striving to be in your position, you would have had the title they wanted. You would have had the salary. You would have been living the life that they wanted. So, like, you did accomplish in a sense.
True.
It's just whether or not that's what you wanted.
Yeah. I remember it always comes back to my uncle. I think it was my mum and my uncle. He came over from New Zealand for a visit just recently, and they were driving down the coast, West Coast Drive, and there's some beautiful big houses up there. And he and mum, I think someone said in the car, they're like, "Oh, look at that house. That's just amazing." And you do that naturally. You're like, "Fuck, that's awesome." And he goes, "Yeah, but it's not the home that matters. It's what's in the home that matters." Totally, hey, like you can have the house, you can have the car, but you could be miserable. You could have a lot of issues. You could have a lot of anxiety, a lot of stress. Like what matters is what's in the home, whether it's in yourself or in the physical home.
Yeah. Couldn't agree more, man. Usually I like to add my little tidbits, but I can't add any more to that.
I can see when it resonates with you because you get that smile, eh?
Give us a rundown on what Cold Water Club is and what you've got coming up in September.
Yeah, awesome, bro. Love it. So Cold Water Club started back, in Canada when I mentioned to you before. So I did a 2-year exchange over there, working holiday visa, and I worked in Canada, and I was visiting around the British Columbia area. And I remember taking this one photo, right? Like Canada's cold, right? But this is in the summer, and the water's still cold, like cold. Like I'm talking 8-9 degrees. And I remember taking photos. So I take photos, and I was taking photos, and I was in this bay, and this one guy was like, he was about in his 50s, and he was jumping in the water. Like he wasn't jumping, but he was like walking in the water, and I'm going, what the hell is this madman doing? So I walked down into the bay, and just like waited till he got out and started chatting with him. And he was like, "Oh, I've been doing." He was 58. He goes, "I've been doing this every day for 3 years, and I haven't been sick once." And I was just like, no way. And then my mind goes like, shit, I want in. And so I'm quite self-disciplined. Well, I'm self-competitive maybe. I just want to push myself to sort of see my limits.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, I'm in. So we ended up arranging this deal where I'd take photos for him because he was a personal trainer as well. I'd take photos for him and he'd teach me what he knew. And so we went into the cold, and it was getting like extremely painful. But then after a while, I was getting used to it, and I was starting to see the benefits in myself. And then I learned about, like, through that process, a couple months later, I learned about Wim Hof, and I realized that this is life changing. This cold water, like they call it cold water thermogenesis, cryotherapy. It's all the same stuff, hydrotherapy. And anyway, I basically realized the power of cold, and I moved back to Perth, and I just come back after 2 years, and I was like, I wanted to create a community around this, and I wanted to get people stepping into discomfort, because we know that, in growth lies pain.
Yeah.
Like 100%. You go to the gym, it's hard, but you get results. And so when we started Cold Water Club, I wanted to get like a like-minded community that gets the benefits of the ocean in the cold, but also supports each other. So we're pushing through that discomfort together. And basically that was it. Like, it was just a desire to become a better version of myself in a community. And then, Sunday, every Sunday, 7 a.m. I think Sunday is probably the day I picked, because I was like, all right, everyone's got it off. Saturday people generally go out. So it's like it's sort of a reason to help people, like, say no to drinking. Because then if you go, oh, I've got something on tomorrow morning, it can give them, because a lot of people that don't want to drink generally need an excuse to start with.
Yeah.
So it's like, all right, if I do it Sunday, people don't go out, people don't drink as much. They might go home a little bit earlier, hopefully. And if not, at least rock up. And so we did. And we started at Sunday, 7 a.m. And then we go and get a coffee afterwards and just connect with like-minded people, man.
That's really cool, man. And that acts as sort of accountability as well. If you're turning up to this and that one time you don't, people like, hey, where were you, man? You're like, oh, shit.
Yeah.
I have to go to the next one, or I'm going to, have
Totally.
this again.
It was super interesting too, man, because like the night before I get this, I always, for a couple of weeks there, I'd get this text message like the night before, and someone's like, yeah, I'm in. And then they get in their bed and they know it's like they've got to get up early, and they just go, oh, I can't make it. And I'm like, and you know what? The big thing I've learned was respecting people's no's.
Yeah.
And also like trying to push them a little bit, but also respecting their no's. So it took a little bit for me to respect that and go, oh, and I'm talking about myself, my discipline here. I had experiences where I ended up later in life where I ended up cultivating a lot of discipline. So now I'm a little bit hard ass in that sense, where I'm like, just get up, man. You'll feel better. Because I tell people, I'm like, you don't necessarily like the man that goes, or the woman that goes into the water, or let's say person. You don't like the person that goes into the water most times, but you friggin' love the person that comes out of it, because you feel alive, man. So yeah, and last week was awesome, bro. We had a big group and we had some new faces, and everyone's running into the ocean, and it was like an orange purple tinge in the sky as we're getting in there. And there was a heap of us stuck around for a coffee afterwards, and it was just awesome.
That's epic. And what have you got coming up with Cold 100?
Yeah, so we're getting a few more people down, and I thought, I just had this thought one day. I was like, wouldn't it be epic just to have a huge group? And there's these guys in Ireland that these two guys called the Happy Pair. They do this every morning, and they ended up having this one event that had like 700 people going into the water in Ireland, man. In Ireland, like cold water. And so I was like, wouldn't that be cool to recreate something similar? So Cold 100 was born on that premise. Like, let's get 100 people sharing the similar goal of walking into the water to feel alive.
That's epic.
So we did that, and we're like, yep, let's start an event. One of my good friends is in PR, and she's a writer, and so she's been reaching out and pushing it all. And on September 1 at 7 a.m. at Scarborough Amphitheatre, we're going to run Cold 100.
That's awesome, man. That's a good way to create a community.
It is, man, and I know you're coming down to that one, aren't
you? Yeah, I'll come down to that one.
Awesome, bro. Awesome.
Respect my no, man.
Yeah. I've had a few of those from you, actually, on Messenger. So you're coming down, I'm like, oh, fucking hell.
We might as well kick off with your childhood, and if you're okay to walk us through that, we'll just flow, man.
Yeah, man, it's cool. So, going back to my story from where from where it all began to where I am now is pretty interesting. I was born, so like I said to you earlier, I was born, my mum's Māori and my dad's Greek. I was born here in Australia, so I'm lucky to have that Māori Greek heritage, which is quite interesting. Look, thank you to the skin tone. But yeah, so my mum moved over to Australia with her family and Koro, her father, in the early 80s, and my mum met my father here in Perth, and so I grew up in this traditional Māori family with mum, with koro, all the Māoris around, and sort of had that heritage, or had that experience growing up. And, my mum met my father, I was born, but unfortunately, when I was about 4, my dad left my mum and I, and he ended up having a severe, an addiction to heroin that lasted probably about 25 years. So he started off smoking marijuana and all that, and it sort of just led one thing to another. And yeah, he went through this huge heroin addiction, and he ended up getting mixed up with the wrong people, got affiliated with some bikies, and ended up doing 3 years in jail for an armed robbery. And this all happened, so I wasn't in contact when this all happened, so he just sort of left when we were 4. I mean, at that point, when he left, mum sort of needed to, being a single mum, as you can imagine, she needed to earn some money. She wanted to earn some money up north, and she had an opportunity, so she went up north, and that left me with koro. So koro is, for those who don't know, koro is grandfather in Māori, and that was his name. That's what we knew him as. And so I grew up with koro, and he was a very well-respected man, a traditional Māori man. Like he was teaching us Māori with the haka. He actually was very athletic. Very disciplined. He played for the Māori All Blacks in New Zealand, and so for a very long time, I was trained very hard by him to follow a similar path in professional sport, and I nearly did. I was going through the NRL ranks over in New South Wales, but so we lived in a big duplex there. So him and my auntie, him and his daughter, bought a duplex, and so I lived on one side with koro, and the other side was my auntie and my 2 cousins, my auntie, uncle, and 2 cousins. But we had one big backyard, and that's like a playground growing up. So we were like throwing the footy, playing backyard cricket, we're doing everything, throwing the ball. And I got a pretty good story, like to give you an example of what it was like living with this man. And he is my greatest role model to this day. And he, like I said, he was very disciplined. So 5 days a week. So I was 7 years old, right? This goes to about 7 years old. I remember this is when it really started. I was 7, my cousin was 9. At 5:30 a.m. every morning, 5 days a week, so yeah, every day before school, he'd wake me up. I'd have to go around to the duplex, back door, go wake my cousin up, Josh, and say, we've got to go. And he'd drive us to the beach, Mullaloo Beach here in Perth. And at 5:30 a.m., we were running to the point and back. And we only measured this about a year ago. It's 4.4 kilometers return trip. And he said to us, if you stop, I'll kick you up the arse and you have to go the other way. And there was once I stopped. There was fucking once, and I only ever do it once. And I said to my cousin Josh, I said, I'm buggered, man. I've got to stop. And this is 7 years old, man. You're running 4.4 Ks 5 days a week. Like, no wonder. My cousin ended up playing in the NRL. Like, he was, until he got shin splints. So it served its purpose, bro. We are disciplined right now. Like, and anyway, I stopped one day, and I said to my cousin Josh, I said, Josh, I've got to stop. I'm buggered. He goes, don't stop. You know what he said. He will know. And I said, he won't know. And I turned around behind me. I said, I can't see him. He won't know. So I stopped for about 5 minutes and started walking. And I continued on running. And then as I was coming back, he was walking along the sand and I was running behind koro. And he saw me. He must have heard us coming or something, but he saw me and he like sort of ran down towards me and kicked me up the arse and said, I saw that, and go to the end and we'll wait in the car. And so I was like head down and I got a fair kick up the arse, and I ended up running to the end. So I think that was about 6 kilometers that day. And he was waiting in the car for me. But, out of all of that, man, like I remember we used to say, to my cousin, I hate koro for what he does. And then like I have the most deep love and respect for that man, for what he's been able to give me. And there was other things that, he gave us, but that's like a really classic example of what I like to tell people of what it was like growing up with him. But unfortunately, was it 99? So I was 9 years old. A couple of years later, he passed away. He died in a car accident. And at that point, Mum was still up north. She was working up north, and she met a man who ended up being my stepfather. And my sister was born, and they were living up north. So when Koro passed away, I was sent up there. And what Mum didn't realize was when she met this man, for the next 14 years, she was going to be physically and mentally abused, and her life was going to be changed. And so I was getting sent back up there to this man who wasn't my father, who I hadn't really spent much time with. and I now live with. And so I think I ended up living with him for, until they split up. There was about 8 years there, man, of just hell. Like, there's some stuff there that, I still can't speak of, that I'm working through now, and I am bringing that to my awareness every time I go in to do some healing. But for a few examples, like, he was a raging alcoholic, and we later found out he had his issues that was causing all of this.
Yeah.
But I remember hanging off the end of a hockey stick to protect my mum at like 10, 11 years of age. Like, I've just gone from this most loving, respectful, like, grandfather figure being in my life to having to defend my mum from this, like, animal, And I remember, like, having to quickly run and grab the mobile phone to call my uncle to get him around there. And then he runs out and my stepfather runs out, grabs the phone and smashes it at my feet in front of me. And I'm just like, far out, I can't do anything here. And, there's another story. Like, I remember he just didn't care. I felt like this disconnect between me and him because I wasn't his son, but my sister was his daughter. And so I remember being at the front playing one afternoon. It was just me and him home. And he was in the end room, and I went down to the end room, and I saw there was a beer in the fridge. I was about 10. And I said, Bevan, can I have a beer? And he goes, I don't care what you do. And I went to the fridge, grabbed the beer, and went out the front. I was sitting on the front porch, 11-year-old, having a beer on the grill. I had a sip. It was tastes like shit. And I, like, tipped it out. But I'm like, and I remember thinking back to this now, and I'm going, holy shit, like, these experiences, have really collectively created the man I want to be for my children. And that's, that's one thing as a point is identifying the benefits that actually came out of that. That's something that I've actually learned to do. But, so going from that point, I think I started growing up. We moved over east. I started growing up to a more physically protective person. Like, I was 16, 17, I was playing rugby. I was bigger. And I ended up physically protecting mum. So we got into some big fights, me and my stepfather. And there was one point where it was just like, I got home. The house, it was Christmas morning. I got home. Mum had been physically beaten the night before. The house was trash. My sister was in a room. The bed was, like, flipped. The cupboards were flipped. It was nuts. Wow. He just went on like an alcohol-fueled rage. And I just thought, I was 17, man. I just said, nah, today's the day. So I grabbed mum. I was sick of the fights. I was sick of me having to, like, I was getting pushed through walls. Like, there was just, it's like stepping on eggshells, man. Anyone knows this, they've been in a domestic, like, they've been through domestic violence. Like, it's like stepping on eggshells consistently through life. So the moment I got mum out of there on Christmas Day 2007 was the first time she'd actually been a free woman for a very, very long time. And so this was the start of her evolution. She ended up meeting another lovely man. She's still married to him today. She still lives over in New South Wales, and I sort of was able to now look after myself. I was 17, 18. I started working. I made some really good money. I was working in the mines at that point. And I made some good money, bro, and I ended up moving back over to Perth.
Yep.
Ended up back over in Perth and got a really good job working for a big company, Rio Tinto. And I think, having this instability in my life over, like, going as a child, like, having all these moments, and especially being with my stepfather, and they were living pay to pay. And I had always had this underlying instability in my life. So it really drove me to create some sort of stability for myself.
Yeah.
So I got a job in the mines. I started earning good money. I started getting a nice car. At 23, I got a job with Rio Tinto working in the control center that took me out of fly in, fly out. At 23, I stopped doing fly in, fly out, but still earning the same money working for a mining company in Perth. But I could sleep in my bed every night. That's what most people dream of in the mining industry, to have the same money. Yeah, you know it. Yeah. Have the same money and come home every night. And so I was lucky. I think I had that attitude from my grandfather, from my mother, that positivity that, allowed me to take that into the workplace. And at 23, I think at 24, so about a year later, with my relentless optimism and my this drive to create stability, I ended up getting promoted in Rio Tinto. I was studying business at the time. I got a promotion with Rio Tinto, and I got a supervisor role working on a project. It was a 12-month project, working up in the Pilbara, Monday to Thursday, 4 days on, 3 days off, supervising a crew that were old enough to be my father, and I was earning $150,000 a year. I was single. I came home every weekend, had a long weekend every weekend. Like, I was going out on the weekends. I was able to buy whatever I wanted. Like it was a good life, man. I was creating a good life. But there was a point there where just, when you have so much money that you're creating all this stuff, there was an underlying feeling of unsatisfaction. And like that, if I kept going through this, I potentially could lead to a path that would be unfulfilling.
Yeah.
And so I don't know what that calling was within me, but I remember it was a Friday morning, and I came back. It was beautiful, like spring Friday morning, man. And I went down the ocean, sunny, it was crystal clear, down at Scarborough Beach. And I lived just near Scarborough in a little unit by myself. And I was just down the ocean, went for a dip, coming home, and I asked this question out loud. And this question ultimately changed my direction from that point. And I just asked, I don't know what made me ask it, but I said, what else is out there? What else is out there? It's got to be something more for me. So I went home. I just asked that question out loud, and I just went home, had a shower, got changed, went up to the local cafe. Was waiting for my coffee and my breakfast, and I was like, this is a beautiful morning, sun's on me. And I was scrolling through Facebook, and I get this blog post pop up, and this blog post came up and it was titled, if you want the answers, or if you seek the answers, travel the world. And I was like, shit. So I clicked on that, and I just was like, whoa, that's for me. Clicked it, and I had goosebumps. Like I was just like, whoa, this is hectic. And so that moment I said, fuck, I got to do this. I'm 24. Like I got the potential to save this money and go traveling for a year, or I could buy, like my goal was to buy a little unit for myself, and follow that cycle of like buying a house, having a marriage, and I think that was sort of that underlying feeling of like that didn't seem right. So instead, I ended up saving about 50 grand. Sold my car and had good money, so I saved 50 grand over the next 9 months, and I left that year, December 2015, and went to Canada, starting off in Canada. And so I got to Canada, and we just were like traveling, snowboarding, partying, drinking, and something that happened like collectively over these years is that dealing with a lot of my past pain, there was really only one way I knew how to deal with it.
Yeah.
And because I didn't understand the things I know now with pain and story and emotions being stored in the body and how we can release it, but I didn't know that. But what I was doing was abusing my body physically with alcohol and drugs. And so I was like, recreational drugs were a big thing for me and my group, and binge drinking was huge. And so, even that started about 18, to be honest, but going into Canada, having 50 grand in the bank, where cocaine was so cheap, it was just happening, man. And I ended up just partying solid for about 2 months. But in that point, that person deep down within me still wanted something more. I ended up using some of my money. I found this opportunity in Canada where I was like, this coffee tastes like ass. Like I was going through Canada, one of those mornings I would have been hungover or whatever, and we're getting coffee before we went snowboarding. I was like, it tastes like shit. And coming from Australia, we know we're lucky. We have good coffee, right? Pretty much everywhere we go. So I bought I used my money, and with my mate who lived in Canada, he was a fitter. We put money together, and we ended up buying an old combi van, a Volkswagen combi van. And that was where really it started to happen. So I was like, let's start a business over here, and found out because he had a Canadian permanent residency, we could actually do this. So we decked it out. We bought a coffee machine, and we ended up like repainting the whole thing, stripping it back, and we sold coffee out of it in the markets in British Columbia for the next 6 months in the summer. It was awesome. We had like an amazing reputation. The coffee, like we were known as like the Aussie coffee, and we had a line like Saturdays were pumping. So I was like going from working in a control room for Rio Tinto to like working out of a combi van, with not having to worry about what PPE you use and not having to be drug tested. Like this was what I thought was living, and it was. But what happened in that period of owning that business was what changed me. And I was serving coffee I think it was during the week. There was a guy that kept coming up to me every morning, and lucky enough, like you get to meet some pretty cool people and hear some pretty cool stories, selling coffee to people. And I met this guy called Dan, and he was about 50 years old, and he started telling me a bit about his story. And what started catching me was that he had faced some pretty deep challenges, and I was like really interested. So he had stage 4 kidney cancer that was nearly terminal, but he went into remission without chemoradiation by doing one thing, and that was changing the way he ate. And at the time as well, his wife was supporting him through this, and she ended up losing 70 kilos. And I was like, what the freak? That, like, my ears pricked up. And I said to him, I said, well, what do you mean you changed the way you ate? And he showed me a photo of his wife, and that was like, whoa, and it showed me him, and he looked old, man. Like he looked old, like not his age, you know, like I'm talking 10 years older. And so I saw this, and I was like, all right, tell me more. What'd you change? What'd you eat? And he goes, I went whole food plant-based. And I was like, what do you mean plant-based? He goes, I didn't eat animal products. And I was like, well, what's that like? Because my girlfriend at the time was vegetarian. So what's that like, vegan? And he's like, well, yeah, vegan. And I was like, oh, straight away, man. I'm like, oh, yeah, nah, I probably couldn't go vegan, eh?
Yeah.
Like, I'm selling coffee to this guy. This is my business. Like he was sort of like, you know, anyone would think that he's coming in to threaten your business, but he was just coming in just for a good coffee. He had like his Americano with almond milk. And so, you know, the process went on over the next couple of months, and every day he'd come in, I was curious enough to ask him a bit more about it and teach me something. And he taught me, it was really cool. And what I loved about Dan was that he never once told me what I needed to do. He never put anything on me. And he was just telling me his experiences and what changed his life and his story. And that's what I think resonated with me the most, because I didn't feel, because, you know, you get a lot of people out there now that go, you've got to do this, you've got to do that.
Yep.
But you don't have to do anything. Let's be honest. You do what you need to do. And that really has stuck with me now to this day. But, you know, I think from here, I asked him, I remember asking him one question. I said, well, what's wrong with milk? Because I'm serving it, right? I said, what's wrong with milk? Milk's good. Like, it gives you calcium, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, look, started talking about casein, which is the protein in milk. And I was like, well, what the hell's casein? Like, what's that? Like a type of cheese? And he goes, look, if you want to do one thing and you want to actually learn a lot more about this, read the book, The China Study. And so the China Study, it was the most comprehensive nutritional study ever done. And it was done over 20 years by this doctor from America. And anyway, that was just sort of left it at that. And about 6 months later, the van was shut down for the winter, and we were on the island, and we were working out there for another coffee company. And I was walking through the library, and I stumbled across the China Studies. About 6 months later, I stumbled across it, and I went, yeah, stumbled, you know?
Yeah.
And I found it, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the book. So I grabbed it. And then I read that. It took me about a month to read that, but for the next couple of weeks, solid, I was just like, couldn't put it down, man. And I told you this before, this is the first time I've ever walked on the sidewalk reading a book. You know how you see those people and you go, how do you know where you're going? I get it now. Like, I actually was like so glued to the book, I could read and walk at the same time. And it blew my mind. So I think from that point I read that book to over the next 6 months, it took me just to learning more about it, and I started making some changes, and I was like, this really has some substance in it. Like, what I'm learning here is mind-blowing, and it started redefining what health was for me. So I started learning more about it. And, 6 months later, I had enough information to make that decision for myself, and I went plant-based September 1, 2017. So it's nearly 2 years being plant-based, but I made the switch. And the key thing here, bro, is like why I made the switch is, and this is funny because I believe truly that our purpose lies in our pain.
Yep.
Truly. Like, if we look deep enough and in our pain, we'll find what it is we're meant to be doing. And so I look back, and this is why I made that decision to go plant-based. And I said to myself, if I get to Dan's age at 50 and I'm sick, I'm not going to be able to be the father I want to be for my children. And that is not okay. That was my sole decision to do this, was because if I'm 50, I want to be running faster than my kids and I want to be climbing trees with them. And if I now know what health is, if I now know if I've just been told that this story of health is now completely different to what we know it, then I'm going to make these changes that I know now based off this new research to make sure I'm the best father possible. And if you look back, and this has just clicked with me recently, by the way. Let me just let you know that. Like, this is and Danielle, my girlfriend, she's been pinnacle in helping me with this. is we connected the dots back on going back over my life story. And I think this is good for anyone out there that's listening. Like, if you write down your story from like your key moments in your life and go from a child, this happened, and all the key points and what happened, you'll start seeing, and sort of to where you're at now, that's where you've got to get to what you're doing now and what you really like now. You'll see that there might be something there that's connected. And so what I was looking back at is going, my decision to go plant-based was based on the problems that I had with my father figures growing up. My dad was addicted to heroin, my real dad, lost him. Well, he was no longer in my life. The role model and my grandfather, who was my true father growing up, he died. And then I was with a physically and a mentally abusive stepfather. And that all led me, that pain through all that process, led me to realize what it truly meant for me to be a father. And I wanted the opposite of all that. And so then my question was with Dan, if I got to 50 and was going to be sick like him, that was not okay for me because I could not be the father. You hear that? Like, that's pretty crazy. Yeah, that's a good why, man.
That's a good why.
But I only recently realized that when I went back through and actually discovered what it was that was my pain. Really, like, started connecting the dots. And so, now that was September 1, 2017, 2 years, the last 2 years, I've gone through YouTube, I've gone through Netflix, and I've gone through all the books, and I'm reading all that shit, man. Like, I'm just going deep into like the plant-based lifestyle and the benefits of the plant-based lifestyle. And I've really fine-tuned what it is for me, like getting the right foods in my belly, like how I can cook it, how I can prepare it, what's good for us, the nutrients that we need. And it's ultimately led me now to studying naturopathy at university. And I've felt this huge change in my body, man, over this last 2 years, where and my eyes are whiter, I'm lighter, I'm more energetic. I actually can feel my body a little bit more. There's no that dense feeling when I was eating meat. My mucus is like dropped. Like, it's been a really significant change, and that's really fueled this passion in me too, because I've seen it within myself, not only with Dan, but I've actually started feeling it in myself. And now, just recently, I've just released, I've got my new platform, Luka Reedy, where I'm helping mentor people make more or introduce more plant-based alternatives into their life. And I'm not telling them, so I'm basically creating a plant-based mentorship platform where I can help people introduce more plant-based options in their life. And that's something that fuels me, bro. Like that I can work on that all the time.
And that's just going to create positive change as well. Like, that's providing actual value. That's not surface level shit at all. That's literally going to change someone's life, change their mental health as well. Yeah,
totally, man. And it's a good point that you raised there. Is that something that I, going back through all my pain, and going through the drugs and the recreational drugs and the alcohol, that substance abuse was just me trying to feel something greater than that pain that I had experienced. And that's really what addiction is just hiding the underlying emotional pain.
Yeah.
Like, and not just drugs and alcohol, that's sex, that's, like we have all these different addictions. Food's a big addiction. Cigarettes, whatever it is, even our thoughts are an addiction. And so I realized that what I was actually starting to feel was I was starting to, through this plant-based lifestyle, I was actually starting to feel this feeling I was trying to get from drugs. I was starting to feel more energy and starting to feel joy and feeling alive. And I realized, like, why can't this be shared? And a lot of people first get their back up and they go, oh no, I couldn't do that, like I did. It took, from the point that I said that in the van to the point now, that was like 2 years, man, like a year and a half or something, that it took me to actually go from, no, I could never do that, to going, hey, there's something here.
Yeah.
And it was just that open-mindedness to go, and that curiosity to go, all right, if what it is that I currently know could potentially be wrong, am I willing to listen to what else is out there?
Yeah. And I think one of the most powerful things that I've come to realize about how much you understand about nutrition and the impact of nutrition on your body is that once you understand that and you see the toxins and the chemicals that are put into our manufactured food, then you start looking at some of the substances you consume, like alcohol, drugs, medication, and you start thinking, fuck, do I really want that in my body? And that just shifts your whole paradigm, man.
Totally, brother. Totally. Because you go, if this food that I'm putting in my body is actually like, you look at nutrient density, like minerals, something that we absolutely need is in fruit and vegetables, and vitamins, But then you go, all right, if I'm trying to feed my body, and this is why, like, I've don't drink for this whole year. I've gone off alcohol until Christmas Day.
Yeah.
For this reason, whereas like you get to this point where you realize you don't actually need, and I still enjoy the social aspect of having a nice wine or whatever, but you get to this point where you actually don't need that substance to feel something when you feel it inherently within you. And it takes a lot for people to get to that point in terms of like, there might be some other healing work, but the quickest and fastest way to make change in your life and feel something differently is to change what you fucking eat. The most quickest way. Like, we can talk about breath work and meditation. Like, that's two really good ways. Yoga. Like, there's a lot of ways that we can heal the body and heal that pain. But the quickest way is stop eating friggin' McDonald's and that shit. Because that's like, and this is something that I always say, that I'm big on, is what we consume, we become.
Yeah.
And when you know this simple thing about biology is that your cells rebuild themselves overnight. They need to use the food that you've put in your mouth to rebuild. It's like you can't build a house without bricks, right? The food that we eat are the bricks for our own body. So if we're eating this shit, like this refined oils, these refined sugars, these like broken down starches that are left to this white color, which lost all their color and their vitamins and their nutrients, like white bread. Where are we at? What are we actually building our body with? And so I'm just getting people to see that, and that's my goal, is just to see what they're actually consuming. Because if they want to be something better, or they want to see some difference in their life, the quickest way is starting to change what you eat.
That's awesome. And I think the conversation that changed my perception of plant-based versus, or even vegetarian versus like heavy consumption of meat and takeaways, McDonald's, that sort of stuff, is we're essentially eating food for energy. And what better energy source than the sun? And then what takes on the energy source of the sun is those plants, is the fruit. And so if you're then eating a cow or a chicken who has to eat something that's taken energy from the sun, you're just, you're taking energy that's been recycled.
Yep. 100%, brother. Like that. I mean, we're going down another path here that I'd love to chat about. That's pure magic. Like, if you talk about magic, Harry Potter, all that, you look at the plant. Look at a plant and go, how have you been created from nothing? Literally, like, it's invisible energy that it's creating these amazing nutrients for us to survive. And when you start seeing it like that, you go, well, hang on, because of this research, and this is the beautiful thing about science, is that we've got, like, through the scientific revolution, we're still learning about these things of like what the body actually needs to function, what are vitamins, what are minerals, and this is in the 1700s. And then, until 1922, this is an interesting fact, right? 1922, they only first isolated insulin. And so what we've come to know about insulin and diabetes in the last 100 years is phenomenal. But that's 100 years, man. Like, wait, what are we going to know in another 100 years? So what my point is that we only know a little bit about the body. And what we're starting to know with science now is redefining what we've already known, is that calcium comes from milk. Well, actually, no. It is in milk, but it's highly acidic, and it's actually leaching the calcium from your bones because of the blood we need to protect the alkalinity of the blood, right? And so there's a process where it actually breaks down the bone tissue. And there's research that is actually showing this. So I'm just encouraging people to actually to be open-minded enough to see that what we know about health is actually redefining now.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah, I can go, bro. I can keep going about this.
I'm super interested in all this stuff, but I've got a list of questions I want to ask about your story.
Sounds good, man.
Rewinding all the way back to your dad leaving, and then your mum deciding to go up north and work. Was there ever a feeling of not being good enough? Obviously, a child that young having their father go away, whether it was his choice or not, and then like for their mother to decide to go away. I can imagine that's a hard spot to be in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally, man. I love that question. So something that's been big for me, right? And this is only recently, I've like in the last couple of years, I've really started to learn about this. But there's a guy called Dr. Bruce. Well, there's Dr. Bruce Lipton.
Yep.
Who talks about epigenetics, and I was watching one of his lectures about from 0 to 7, we're in this brainwave state called theta, and where our subconscious is programmed the most in that period, right? And so if I go back to that point with my father, I was 4 years old. But what I didn't realize was that, the way I was carrying myself now was showing traits of what I was missing in that period where he left. And so something that's been big for me coming up has been abandonment. And it wasn't in the sense of not being good enough. It is the case, because I was left. And so now I'm being like, now my behaviors today, right? So this was something that's been recent as well. It's been a very, very new path for me, man, and this path of healing. It's been beautiful. So something that I was paying attention to, and this is through meditation and through self-awareness, which is the most important thing we can cultivate, is the very first thing we can cultivate in ourselves is self-awareness. And I realized that I was portraying myself in a certain way in social settings that showed this lack of, this incidence of abandonment. So I was like needing self-recognition. Yeah. I was needing external validation. I was missing people in my life. So it's like someone that would actually make me feel good. I would miss them. So when this is a good example. So when you miss someone, they're giving you something that inherently you love feeling in you that you don't have. And that was this lack of like inner love feeling. And so I go back and I did this meditation, and it was really cool because it was like this meditation going back in time, back to your inner child. And if anyone hasn't done any inner child work, it's crucial, because you will actually start identifying some of the things you're doing today that go right back to your subconscious that you can't even remember consciously. And so I went back to this meditation, right? And I went back to when I was 4. And there was I remember I was there, I was seeing it. And I remember walking into this house. I was hiding next to the hallway door. My mum was with me in the kitchen, and my dad was walking up the hallway, and I was hiding to scare him. And I jumped out and scared him, and he went straight past me and ignored me. And I just remember looking at that boy going, he was like shocked, going, oh, he didn't notice me. And then that was the moment that him and my mum split up. And then I remember just being in the car looking back at Dad as Mum was driving off crying. And so I called my mum the next day. And at this point, so I called my mum that next day, and I said, Mum, I did this meditation. I had this weird vision. And I told her, I said, did this happen? And she goes, oh my God, yeah, that was the day we split up. And I had never remembered that. And that was in that subconscious that was deep down there. And it came back, and that allowed me to identify that there was this abandonment issue. You know what I mean? So like I'm working on that to get rid of that, and start showing up in the world where I don't need this self-recognition, where a specific amount of followers on social media doesn't actually fuel my insides, that I only feel my insides. And that's the work that I've had to keep doing, you know?
That's awesome, man. And I've found that recently. I accidentally deleted my Open Up Instagram, trying to delete my personal one. One of the lessons is I rush things sometimes.
Yeah.
And so
man, that's good self-awareness.
And so I deleted it, and it's gone forever, so I had to start a new one. And in the process of starting a new one, I found that I've got more freedom or more permission from myself to be myself. So I'm being super goofy, like on my stories, who I usually am, being super, my partner would call it annoying on my stories, but it's resonating with people. And I'm finding that I'm not pandering to getting likes or comments. I'm just content putting up the content that I feel makes a difference. Yeah,
that's powerful, man. That's a good level of self-awareness, hey, where you can go, and now you like start to be your true self.
Yeah.
Which is crazy when you start doing that. How good does it feel, hey?
Yeah, man. No masks. Don't need to
No
worry about
masks.
anything. No anxiety.
Because we start, and we start putting in so much energy portraying ourselves to certain groups of people. And that, going back to this abandonment thing and this need for external validation, I just went to a retreat just recently for a conscious enterprise retreat in Bali. And I wanted to be, I was an A grade student. I was up front answering questions first, putting myself out there, like doing the homework. And there was this exercise on day 3, which is about storytelling, the old story. And then I got to this point where I was like in this storytelling process that I realized I was putting on this mask to these facilitators who are like distinguished people, like they've done a lot of work and they're helping a lot of people, and I just wanted to be liked by them. And so I was subordinating myself in order to fit in. And then I'm good like this now, where I put my hand up and I'm like, look, I just want to talk about something. I want to share something. This is what I've been doing. And I opened up to the group and I said, this is what I've been doing, and I don't think it's right. And I realized that I'm not being my true self here, and I'm trying just to be liked. It comes back to my dad. It comes back to all that shit, man.
That's really good, man.
Yeah.
To have a level of vulnerability to let yourself do that in front of people. That's powerful. That's what truly allows you to change, I think. How have you gone about cultivating that sort of vulnerability?
Yeah, good one. Coming back from Canada to this point now, I was my old group know this specific Luka, right? This specific Luka that had a mask on always, and that we didn't talk about what he deeply enjoyed, and came back. I remember coming back for a brief period when I was in Canada. I was vegetarian at this point, and I remember scared to tell the boys that I was vegetarian, and I told them, and I was like shy, saying, yeah, no, I am, and I'm like, yeah, no, it's just for the health, and that was I wanted to get off the subject real quick. And so it was the little moments of actually speaking and putting yourself out there. And so like speaking, saying I'm vegetarian, and now it's just it's cultivating slowly over that. And like, for instance, starting my new Instagram and putting up myself of like what I truly believe in and putting it up on Facebook. And there was an instance there where I've put this video on this group that I'm on Facebook, this private group that I run on Facebook. But I was like thinking to myself, I would actually be nervous if I put that up on my normal Facebook. And this was only a couple months ago. And I'm like, that's not okay. And so I was like, stuff it. I literally posted the same video on my personal page and said, my true self is not limited to a closed Facebook group. I should be able to express myself truly if my intentions are loving and respectful. And they were. And so I just did it, and it was freeing, man. It was freeing. But vulnerability, it's like you want the courage. Like vulnerability takes a lot of courage, man, because we're trying to be something that we are truly, but in ourselves, and this is how we would act when we're at home. But we're scared of what other people think. And when we have that moment, and this is what I think a lot about too, is like when we have that moment when we're scared or we're scared to push through something, that's coming from somewhere deeper. That's coming from this like lack of something that we've cultivated that we've experienced as a child. Yeah. Would you say that?
Yeah, man, 100%.
Yeah. So it's
all going back to moments of impact or traumatic moments.
Yeah, man. When you start this work, I'm not going to lie. I'm like, Jesus, is this ever going to end? Like, I feel like I've just gone through a big breakthrough, and then I'm like, oh, there's some more shit coming up.
Yeah. That's all part of the process. It's just a cycle, eh? Once you're content with the fact that you're always going to be working through something, then life becomes a lot easier, and you give yourself permission to flow and just go with those ebbs and flows rather than resist change or resist anything that's coming up that needs to be worked through.
Totally, man. And one thing I just want to point out on that is like, it's not a scary point of like knowing that you've got to work through something. That's not, that you shouldn't be scared of that, because what happens in that process is like when we do release something, we become more compassionate. Would you agree? Yeah. Like there's some things that would have pissed me off about 6 to 12 months ago, even 2 years ago, that I would not be able to stand. And now it's like it doesn't even affect me. because whatever was triggering me in that point has been released. I've worked through it. And like you get to a point, and I noticed this when I was having dinner with my friends a few months ago, is that what clicked for me is that we were having this beautiful dinner and conversation where we did not talk about one other person in a negative way. You know, and that was something that we would always do. We'd always be whinging about someone or complaining about someone or picking on someone.
Yeah.
And like now we're just talking about the beautiful things in life, you know, because we've worked through that shit.
Oh, that's been a big process for me, man. I was brought up with a mother that me and my brother used to call the C machine or complain bot, because she just used to complain and gossip and never really had any friends. And so she'd always just gossip, and I picked that up, and that was the way I found I related to a lot of my friends. And so I ended up talking. I'd be that person who would talk shit about a friend who wasn't there, or have to talk shit about someone or mock someone or belittle them to fit in and to get a laugh.
That's huge, man. How's your relationship with your mum now?
Really good, man. She's changed entirely. She hardly complains at all. Hey, so and that's like the power in growth, is that people see your growth, and if they do love you, if they do admire you, or if they do, I don't know, if they're open-minded enough, they will be inquisitive about how you've managed to get yourself to that position and work through the stuff that you've worked through.
Yeah, it's like this exuding energy, hey, where someone sees the energy that you're putting out, like this positivity, like things are happening for you, things are starting to like flow. Like for you, like what the work that you're doing is creating this whole new life that you would never experience. And then someone goes, "What the hell's Lachlan doing? I want some of that." You know, like that's how it works, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's
really cool. That's really cool.
What I've had to learn with that is it doesn't work if you try and force someone. Like you said, respecting the no. Like the more you disrespect the no, the further you're going to drive them into saying no and being resistant. So just me being me and being happy with my growth and allowing people to see me for who I am. That's what's brought on the intrigue, and that's what's brought on the growth for both my mum and my dad.
Awesome, bro. It's infectious, eh? It's infectious. That's really cool.
Going back to your koro brother.
Yeah.
Knowing that he was like a drill sergeant, getting you up at 5:30, and like you said, you went through this patch where because of that, you and your cousin were like, "I hate my koro." Did you ever feel good enough for him?
You know, there was probably at that age, I always wanted to be the special one. So I was like, because we had so many cousins, and we all were quite close, that I always wanted to be the special one. And you know, to a certain extent, I spent more time with him anyway because I lived with him, just me and him. But I would push myself, and there were things that I wasn't good at that my cousin was. He was 2 years older than me, and we were quite competitive, and he would always just beat me at things. Like I think the only thing I could beat him at was like sprint running.
Yeah.
And that was the only thing, man. Like, and there's hundreds of things that we did. So like there was this thing of like constantly being second. And you know, it's a good point. I've never really thought of that in that sense of like not being good enough for him. But in saying that, like I just recently, I was playing a lot of competitive state touch football here in Perth, and so I was wanting to push to go up to like to play at national level and represent the country if that was like possible. So like I was training hard. I was having a sprint coach. Like I had this amazing discipline that I had from a very young age, and I was like working hard for that. And then I realized at the start of this year, I realized that I got back from a trip over in Bali again, and I got back and I was like, I just finished state titles, and I was like, it doesn't light me up anymore. Like what I was about to go back and do and train and do all that, I was like, it didn't light me up. And then I just started thinking about it. I'm like, but I wanted to, my intention to go to play for Australia, right, was to actually do it on a plant-based diet. Yeah. So I could show people, well, I don't like saying diet, plant-based lifestyle. So I could show people that you could achieve great things doing this, living this way, you know? And so that was my intention. But then I realized that if I'm not passionate, if I'm not like crazy about this thing, then it's not actually meant to be for me. And so then I realized it was actually a borrowed dream. And what I was trying to achieve was something that my grandfather always wanted from me. Was Koro always wanted us to be professional athletes. And it just come back to me wanting to do this for him.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people now, if they have a good look at this, and if they're doing something that, you know, they do enjoy, that they are good at, but they're not passionate about, they don't absolutely love doing it consistently, then in my experience, it's probably a borrowed dream, that we're trying to do it for someone else. And for my case, it was doing it for Koro, because, you know, he was gone. He was my father figure. I wanted to do this for him. I wanted to make it for Australia. So, you know, I was trying to do something for him, man, for sure.
Man, that's powerful. I guess, like, knowing that your mother split with your real dad, and then she had to go up north, and then obviously losing her dad as well. Looking back now, do you understand why your mother chose your stepfather and why she stayed with him?
You know, I think mum. Okay, well, let's just go back a few steps. Well, let's just talk about this for a second. In any story and in any case, there is always benefits. Like, and I realize that now. And so once upon a time I didn't. And I would always say, why the fuck were you with him? Like, why did you stay with him for so long? And I told mum consistently to, like, get out, let's get out, but she couldn't. And so when she was with him, she actually lost a lot of herself. And the biggest and greatest tool that I've learned from my mum is watching her through that process is she never lost her attitude, her positive attitude. And she went through some beatings, man. She went through some shit. She was oppressed. And to this day, when now I see a female getting victim to oppressive behavior, I go nuts. And I'm working on that. But that's because I saw that in my stepfather. And so the greatest gift that I really got out of that, you know, well, there's a few, but the greatest gift that I really got out of that was this optimistic behavior that I have now by witnessing my mum in that case, you know. And so there's still, and this is the biggest relationship. This is the biggest relationship that I'm still working on to this day, because I remember just recently talking about a situation with Bevan, with my stepfather. And it actually crippled me. I was talking about it with Danielle, and I couldn't go any further. And I said I had to stop, because it literally, my whole body was just dense, and it was vibrating, it was shaking, like anxiety, like this whole, like it just shut down. And I've never felt that ever. Wow. And it's deep in there, man. And it's deep. And I had to stop talking about it just before the whole story had finished. And I haven't brought that back up. And that just made me realize there's some deep shit in here. And there's some stories that I still haven't been able to talk about, but they are benefits.
Yeah.
There's always a benefit. We just have to choose to change our perspective on that. And that's what I'm doing now.
I asked this because this is something I've seen in my mum as well. Like, my brother and sister, they're older than me, probably 15 years older, but their father used to beat the shit out of my mum. And he used to beat the shit out of their kids too. But I've had this conversation with her where she's now going through counselling. I'm like, do you feel like you're staying with, like, our father now because you had a man that treated you so poorly, and so you feel like you have to commit and prove that you deserve someone who actually decided to treat you well? And so, like, looking at your mum's relationship with your stepfather, do you feel like she stayed because she lost your real dad and her father? And it was like the same sort of thing, like, men leave me?
I guess that was your original question. I didn't even answer.
That's right.
Yeah. Now I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I went on a tangent. Yeah, totally, man. And, you know, this is something that I believe, and seeing this with my mum, is that she and I, you know, okay, so just recently I had a conversation. My father came back into my life just a couple months ago, And he was talking to me about, he said, how's your mum? And I said, she's great. She's doing all this. And I told her about the whole situation with Bevan, and she's like, and I said, what was she like? And I said, well, she was like this, he was like this. And he goes, you're kidding. Like, your mum was like that. He's like, that's completely different lady to what I knew. Like, she was just oppressed, where she lost a lot of herself, and then she lost her father on top. And I remember, man, the day we lost Koro, a couple of days after we were planning to come back to Perth and have the funeral, and he just went nuts. He goes, that's it. You're not going to your father's funeral.
Whoa.
And that was it. Yeah, and just walked out of the house. And Mum was just crying. So she got broken down piece by piece, like, by this man. And she continued for a long time to, like, not have this confidence where she could go out on her own. And that's why I think she didn't for a long time.
Yeah.
Where, it was a 14-year relationship, because she probably could have made that a 7-year relationship, but she didn't have the courage to step out. And the thing was is that when my father knew her, she had courage. She was independent. She was strong, but she lost it.
Yeah.
And she's got it back now, man. Like, we speak every day. We're very close, and she's loving life. And yeah, but yeah, you're right. Like, she ultimately, and this is another thing I like to talk about too, with consistent patterns in your life,
Yep.
is that if it keeps happening over and over and over and over, you're not paying attention to what it's there to teach you. So there's something that you're going to learn from every person in your life. But if you have the same people coming into your life over and over again, in particular, like this example, you're not going to learn.
Yeah, and I think in that situation, the same with my mother staying with that guy for so long, I think, like you said, you get broken down to an extent where you start to believe that that's what you deserve. And so venturing out to find freedom, to liberate yourself from being that oppressed or being abused that way is scary, because it's not the norm. That's essentially breaking out of your comfort zone. And that's what fear is. Breaking free of the comfort zone.
100%, man. And that takes, it's hard, especially when you've got no self-confidence left. Yeah. When someone strips that from you. And this is why I think it's very important to surround yourself with people that do support you and not debilitate you. It's because, it's two, and this is something that I've been learning about lately, the parasite and the ally. The two sides of the coin. Parasite will suck it from you. The ally supports you, helps you move forward. We all need allies, man. We're going to have parasites. They teach us something, but we need to surround ourselves with more allies. Yeah. And in this case, like, for your mum to get out of that, I don't know whether you guys were big enough where you became her ally. No. I became, okay, yeah, maybe not as big as, whatever. But, like, you need someone to help get you out. And for this case, like my mum, it was me. I was big enough now. I was 16, 17, where I could fight back. And I had a car, so I had a car license. So now I could pick her up. I got her in the car and I said, I'm driving you to the cop shop. And we did. And that was what got her out. But until then, until you don't have that support, it's pretty hard. And a lot of people can stay in a relationship because they're not surrounded by, or they don't have any good support.
Yeah, that's powerful, bro. Did you, obviously, it was a stretch of just years of emotional and physical abuse. Most people listening or watching would think, man, I'd absolutely hate that man for what he was doing to me and my mother. Did you ever crave his love? Did you ever want it at all?
What I wanted was someone to be able to call father or dad. And so what I saw growing up, and it was a big challenge for me, because I saw a lot of other kids in high school, they had good dads. Yeah. They came and watched them play sport. Like, my stepfather wasn't athletic at all. And I went from, like, having my grandfather down the beach with me, just like pushing me and always there, taking me to every sporting game on the weekend. And I was just with him by his side the whole time, to a man that just didn't come down and watch me play sport, wasn't even interested in it, didn't even know how to fucking throw a tennis ball. Like, it was completely different. So, I just craved that. I craved that father figure, and I couldn't call him dad for ages. I tried a couple of times and it just made me feel sick. It just made me feel sick, man. But you know, I truly, and I want everyone to know this too, and if they're resonating with something like this in their life, is that people need to realize that every person is there to teach them something. And as bad as that was, there was, and there is always someone going, there is always something that's happening worse out there in this world. We need to be appreciative of what we're actually experiencing, because we can use that to help others. We can, and we can use that to grow ourselves. And like I said, describe me, I just want to become the best version of myself. So I need to see the benefits in this. That's not easy, because you have to confront yourself to all that shit that you've gone through to find the benefits. But now, man, I want to be the best fucking father I could ever be. You know?
That's awesome.
And I make sure I cut out my oppressive. If I've got any of that oppressive shit, that controlling behavior, I'm gonna like tap it on the head ASAP.
That's cool. And I think that's a good segue into my next question is, with your real dad, and talking about him going to prison and him leaving, before we started recording, you said that like, he's a lovely man. And then obviously we've seen like the contrast and being this kid with your koro saying that you and your cousin hated him for what he made you do in the mornings to you then saying that he's still to this day your biggest role model. I'm not too sure if you've done this yet with your stepfather, but how have you gone about reframing the stories that you had regarding those men?
The biggest and easiest thing for me to like help identify more compassion for them is by realizing that they are only a product of their own pain.
Yeah.
If I'm a product of my own pain, which I've seen, then they're only a product of their own pain. And that's given me a lot more compassion for them. And you know, when like I said, my father came back into my life this year, which was crazy, because we never thought that he would ever come back. And it just happens by a series of events that occurred that he came back into my life, and he called me on my birthday this year.
Well,
yeah, and which was in June. And then we had this beautiful conversation, and I just stopped at the very, very start. I haven't spoken to him in 10 years, and he had gone through all this shit of just like manipulating family, conning, like stealing stuff and selling things to make money, like asking family for money to buy drugs, and like no one and everyone knew of him as just like a manipulator. And so when you'd bring his name up and say, why do you want to do something with that man? Like,
yeah,
it was just like he had a bad name, right? And so he had ended up getting himself clean along in the last 10 years and not doing drugs anymore. But he just realized that he'd fucked up all his relationships in his family, that no one would ever want him back. So he just like left it at that. But anyway, a series of events happened. His brother died. Okay. His brother died of a heroin addiction, overdosed. The next of kin, because they didn't have a good relationship, the next of kin was my auntie. And on her birthday, it happened. She gets a phone call from a private number, but didn't answer it. And the next of kin was my dad. So the police went around, found out where he lived. He lives down south here. Went to his house and said, "Are you such and such?" "Yep." Do you know this person?" "Yeah, that's my brother. He's just passed away. Can you contact your family?" So now he has the details of my uncle's passing, and now has to call my auntie for the first time in 10 years after everyone's hated him. And he was super nervous, he reckons. And he came back into contact. And from that period, that was in January this year, and then from that period they stayed in touch, and he asked my auntie if he could get in contact with me, and I said, yeah, you know what, he can. And for a long time, I didn't actually want to call him Dad. I wanted to call him by his name, Mark. And I was like, for a while I tossed it up. I'm like, and I said to my auntie, do I call him Dad or Mark? I don't know. Like, he doesn't deserve to be called Dad. Like, he fucked up everyone's life. He didn't treat us with respect. And then I realized this one thing. I was like, if I don't call him Dad, I'm simply holding on to the pain of the past and not forgiving him. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, that's it. That's how sometimes we hold on to these grudges and these pains and don't release it, because we're still like, it's in our language, right?
Yeah.
So he called me on my birthday, and I said, how you going, Dad? And I said, it's really good to hear from you. And he was nervous. You could hear it in his voice. And I said, look, just before you go any further, I want to tell you this one thing. I want to say something to you. I said, look, I don't hold any grudges for you. I want to actually thank you for what you've done. if you did not leave us, if you did not give me this opportunity, because he got back into contact with me a few years ago, if you did not give me this opportunity to come back to Perth, I would not have met the girlfriend I have now. I would not have had the experience I have now. I would not know what I know now. Life could have been completely different, and I wouldn't want that. And I just want you to, I want to tell you that I thank you, and I hold no grudges, and I don't want you to hold on to that. And that was, man, like you could hear it in his voice. Like he was just like, holy shit. And then he just, we just kept in contact over the next couple, this is really funny actually. We just kept in contact. And he came down just a couple of weeks ago to stay with me. It was the first time we've seen each other in 10 years. And this guy, man, like he's 6'5", like he's covered head to toe in tats, and like, but to real, he and I was like a little bit intimidated, because the last time we haven't really seen each other. And anyway, he comes up and said, if you're okay, I'd love to come up and see you. And I said, yeah, cool. Do you want to stay here? And he goes, yeah, I'll stay with you. And so he stayed on the couch with me, and for the whole weekend, man, he went completely plant-based. And he even cooked a plant-based meal. And I said, if you come up here, Dad, I'm plant-based. I hope you're okay with that, living with that. And he said, yeah, cool. And so he was like, I'm all in. And so it was this really cool relationship we had, man. It was like really healing. And I was proud of him actually for that.
That's awesome, man. That's super beautiful.
Yeah. So, who knows? Maybe I'll get him one day. But he did say afterwards, he goes, you're getting me thinking about all this stuff. Like, obviously being in contact with you has given me so much more hope. Like I'm really grateful for you guys for taking me back in and forgiving me. And I'm really sorry. And actions speak louder than words. I'm going to prove myself to you. And he's coming up again this weekend, actually, to come into Cold Water Club. He's coming on Sunday to go to the ocean swim. So yeah, no, it's good.
We'll probably move on to the recovery, brother, and like overcoming some of the stuff that you've worked through. You've spoken about your plant-based lifestyle and what that's done for you and your mental health. Mm-hmm. Could you run us through breathwork, meditation, how you've used them and how you implement them now?
Yeah, awesome, man. So the first thing that made the big shift in my life was meditation. I always wanted to learn it. And when I was in Canada, I had the opportunity. Well, actually, about a year before I went to Canada, my friend mentioned to me that he did Vipassana, which is a 10-day silent meditation retreat. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Tell me about that. And it's like for 12 hours a day or 11 hours a day, you're meditating. You don't make any eye contact with anyone. Guys and girls are separated, and you don't speak, you don't write, you don't read, and you just meditate and you go deep within yourself. And it was like get up at 4 a.m. and go to bed at like 9:30. And I remember like going, fuck that. That was a year before I went to Canada. Anyway, it comes up in Canada. It came up again about a year later. And then we looked at the itinerary, and I was like, nah. And I still wanted to learn meditation because everyone talks about the benefits of meditation. And I just couldn't sit down and do this guided meditation shit. Like I couldn't even sit still for 5 minutes. My mind was just going crazy. And anyway, we get to a point where I rung my mate back up who told me about it. And I said, man, what do you think about Vipassana? And he goes, honestly, it was life-changing for me. If you get the opportunity to do it. But that's all I'm saying. I'm like, yeah, it looks a bit crazy though. And we put it off for about another 6 months. And it came to a point where this opportunity arose where we actually had the 10 days, because it goes to 10 days, where we did it in Canada just before we left to come back to Australia. And that moment was like, gave me a whole new perspective on the mind, our trauma, our body, and what we can actually do to start working with it to heal. Because in this Vipassana meditation, there's no dogma or doctrines attached to it. It's just simply a technique that they teach you that's been around for thousands of years. And what they teach you is that they call them sankaras in English, in our language. And they talk about sankaras are actually stored emotions in the body. And that was the first time I ever heard about it. And that when pain comes up, when you sit still and pain comes up in that section of the body, that's just a stored emotion. And for me, like first time hearing about that, I'm sort of like, sounds a bit wishy-washy. But then you get doctors like Joe Dispenza coming out and he's talking about this shit like in another way. And you get Dr. Bradley Nelson talking about the emotion code. And then you get Bruce Lipton talking about epigenetics and like the way we talk to ourselves is the way we respond or show up. And then I'm like, fuck, there's something to this. And so that really started this meditation path of like, then I just started like practicing. Well, the great thing about Vipassana was, I did learn about that, but I also learned about something that I've always wanted to do. That's meditation itself. So I had a technique. And so from after that was at the end of Canada trip, I decided to meditate at least once a day. And when I meditate, not only do you find stillness, or you create stillness in the body, you create space in the body, you also start noticing like consistent thoughts coming up.
Yep.
Like, what is it that's coming up? Or you can actually get answers to a solution because you're finally creating space. And I'm showing you my phone here in this case. Like, in a world where we have these and these laptops and these TVs with Netflix, we're constantly stimulated and we're constantly distracted from actually seeing what really is deep down within us. And so meditation now, to this day, like I've got better and better at it, and I meditate morning and night, like without a doubt. Like, that's the one thing I'll always do for the rest of my life. Like, it's been so rewarding for me, man. And even to the point where people can't sleep. If people can't sleep, there's a few things you can do other than meditation, but meditation is key to shutting down that subconscious chatter, or the conscious chatter. And do that just before you go to bed, man. And that was life-changing. And then, so if we talk about breath work, we know that, I mentioned this, we know that emotion's stored in the body, right? Mm-hmm. And I know you've done breath work. Emotion stored in the body needs to come up. Breath work, the oxygen in the breath, activates different parts of the cells in the body where it starts moving it. It starts basically moving the body, like energizing it to release shit. When I first did breath work was through Wim Hof. So when I learned about Wim Hof in Canada, when I had Ken, the 58-year-old cold water swimmer, he told me about, so he actually told me about the cold, and then I learned about Wim Hof after. So I started doing Wim Hof's breath work. But I started doing it for the health benefits of oxygenating the blood, right?
Yep.
Because the benefits of actually like eliminating disease happens when we saturate our body with oxygen, because disease thrives in carbon dioxide environment. So I started doing it for that. But then by just practicing that Wim Hof technique, I was like, I do breath work, which is a different type of breath work to this, like a lot of the biodynamic breath work or the tantric breath work that you see. There's so many different things, aspects of it. So it just pushed me down that path of breath work. And then I started working with Luke Smith here in Perth.
Yep.
Absolutely amazing breathwork facilitator. And I did one of his workshops, and I couldn't believe the crying that came out of me, man. Like, he comes around and you're doing this breath work, like this process, and then he comes around and they just know where to touch you, and that just moves the muscles a little bit. And it just brought out this overwhelming, like, hysterical cry. And the thoughts that came up were back from my mum, back as a child, with her being oppressed. And like, I felt her pain, and I just felt all that pain that I had when I was watching her. And it, by simply being aware of it and being present and allowing it to come through, because, you know, a lot of people will say, don't cry, right?
Yeah.
Classic one. Yeah, be tough, don't cry. Fucking cry, man. Let that shit out, because that is just stored emotion. And so breathwork's been powerful, and I still do it like now regularly. And I'll go and see a practitioner, and I go and see a lady around the corner who does a different type of breathwork, and it's been one of the quickest, like the most effective tools to releasing a lot of that pain.
Yeah, it's like a natural, well, not natural, but internal plant medicine.
Oh, yeah, I knew you were going to say that. It is, man. I remember, like the oxygen, what it can do, man, what it can do. Like, I remember going to this lady around the corner, Hayley. She does a 2-part tantric breath work.
Yeah.
She does a sound healing as well. And so it's amazing. It's really immersive for about an hour and a half. And I went there, and my first breath work with her, and I remember getting up off the table, and you know when you go like 4 rounds of this deep breath work and you're getting like vibrations through the whole body, and I'm going back to these like substance abuse days, right? And I'm just going, why the fuck are we doing that? And I wake up, I get off the table, and I sat up and I said to Hayley, I'm like, Hayley, I have no idea why we need to do drugs and alcohol. We just need to breathe. This is insane. And she just started laughing and shaking her head. She goes, I know. That's why I'm so passionate about it. And it is like, we get this deep, like this amazing feeling in the body of like truly feeling alive, eh? Would you agree?
Yep. It's been one of the most profound things still to this day that I've ever done. It's definitely the one that's brought up my trauma so that I could face it, re-experience it, and relinquish it. And it's
Wicked.
like instant.
Yeah.
Well, 40 minutes or so instant.
Yeah, 40 minutes instant. Yeah. That's awesome, man.
We'll move on to a couple questions, then we'll wrap up, brother.
Yeah, sounds good, bro.
Knowing everything that you've been through up until now, and you've been through some challenges, still working through some, what would you say the quality of your life is like now?
Oh, fucking amazing, man. Amazing, eh? Like, we talk about this every day. Like, we do our gratitude every day. Danielle wakes up and she goes, it gets me a little bit every time because I'm like, I always want to, and this is something that I'm only working on, but she's like, what are you grateful for? And I'm like, oh, fuck, I don't know straight away, and I want to have an answer straight away.
Yeah.
But, you know, the point is, she says every day, what are you grateful for? And when you start thinking about it, it's an endless list. Like, you can just, because if you've got a roof over your head, like, I've got a warm shower if I want one. I got carpet in my room. It's warm in my room. I've got a beautiful, comfortable bed. Like, I've got a good life, man. I don't need, what we realize is that when you start doing this work, you realize that you don't actually need these external materials to make you happy. You know what I mean? Like,
Yep.
that's what I realized. And so now, for instance, I don't earn anywhere near the money that I used to earn in mining. I earn probably about 1/4 of that. But my, like, happiness level, boom, through the roof, man. I couldn't be any more happy because you realize money doesn't make you happy. You make you happy.
Yep.
And so, yeah, that my quality of life now has changed simply by just doing the work, bro. By doing the work.
I feel you on that one because sorry, I just seen someone walk in the background.
Yeah, that's Kaylin. She's an amazing PR lady, man. She's getting my story out there.
I can attest to that because I've been through, well, obviously, like working FIFO as well, working oil and gas, and then now making absolutely nothing and having my partner fund all of Open Up, pretty much fund my life. Like, this is the happiest I've ever been in my life. So I know for sure money don't make a difference.
Yeah, and you know what? That's a good point, bro. Is one thing I've realized is the money is just energy. And if you start seeing it that way, you realize that once you change the state that you live in, because we live in 2 states, that's love and that's fear.
Yep.
All emotions are connected to those states. When you start living in that state of love, and when we like doing the work, breath work, meditation, realizing that our trauma is, or our pain is our purpose, we start going into this state of love because we release that shit that holds us in that scarcity state, in that angry state, in that lack of state. And then we get things like yourself doing the work. Your life is changing. You're actually able to do what you want to do now instead of having to like suffer through that pain in your body and through that environment that you were working in, simply by just doing the work, bro. So for you, like, I commend you for like taking action and like wanting to do something that you love and helping share people's stories to help enhance the lives of others. You know, like, it's beautiful work, man. It's beautiful work.
It. You're so articulate too. 2 quick questions, brother, then we'll wrap up.
Yep.
What are you most grateful for right now?
Oh, right now I'm grateful for the gifts that I've had to make me the person I am right now.
Yes.
You know, that, yeah.
If you had the chance to put a message on a billboard, knowing thousands of people would see it, what would that message be?
Oh, that'd be a fucking good few messages there. Mine would be, strive to become the best version of yourself first.
Nice. That was
I was going to say something about eat more plants, but like, I was like, no, that's okay. Become the best version of yourself first.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Cool. To wrap up, bro, I just want to acknowledge you for making time to do this.
Thank you, man.
It's been a long one, and I'm super grateful for you making the time to do it. But apart from that, for knowing now what you've been through, I had no idea the sort of abuse that you suffered, and the challenges you've overcome, and the challenges you're still overcoming. But knowing what you've been through, turning that pain to power, and now obviously with your platform, promoting a plant-based lifestyle, I just want to acknowledge you for the fact that you are positively impacting the lives of others. So thank you.
Oh, thanks, brother. I really appreciate that, man. Like, it's nice to hear that. And also, like, likewise, bro. Like, I really appreciate you taking your time to actually make this podcast available to people. I think that's really important. Like that you're actually, and I know what you do with your workshops and your events. Like, yeah, really commendable, man. And stepping into yourself and being vulnerable and making a difference.
Thank you, bro. Received.
And I can't wait to see you on September 1.
September 1,
And,
yes.
And bring this this lovely partner of yours.
I will.
Please.
I will. So if anyone wants to go to that Cold 100, that is going to be Scarborough Beach Amphitheatre, September 1.
That's it, brother. And you can look up Coldwater Club on Facebook and like the page and see the event.
Just link to the event in the show notes as well.
Yeah, awesome, brother.
Sweet. Cheers, bro. Have a good day.
You too, man. Take care.